Hello, you're listening to 187th special episode of Web Standards Podcast. I'm your host, Vadim Makiev from HTML Academy, and today we have a very special guest, good friend of mine, Bruce Lawson. Hello, Bruce, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Привет. Hello, everybody. I'm Bruce Lawson, handsome but middle-aged web standards guy in the UK, United Kingdom. I'm sitting here. It's a lovely and sunny in my large palace, looking out at my garden with a small dog sitting on my feet. Vadim and I go way back. So we were both in the developer relations team at Opera when Opera was a thing, and we've coincided at many conferences and events in the last 10 years, and long may we continue to do so.
Yeah, one of the reasons I asked Bruce to join us today is interesting fact. Last year, I gave a talk called Semantics for Cynics. I gave it in Russian a few times, and I even gave it once at Frontiers Jam session. So I think there should be a video of me trying to speak English at Frontiers. And I also saw Bruce's article published some time ago. I think it was December last year.
Something like that.
And it surprised me because we were expressing the same ideas and talking about almost the same thing, like semantics in HTML and the reason it still exists and the reasons we should care about it as developers. And I was surprised to see that we shared almost the same ideas and even sometimes even similar pictures from Apple presentation. I'm gonna ask you first, what was the reason for you to write this article? Just to summarize, why do you think it's still important? And then I share my own view. Maybe it would be unnecessary because you have the same.
I can tell what you're doing, Vadim. You're trying to trap me into confessing that I copied your talk, and then you're going to sue me for millions. I know how it works. I think it's not surprising that we have similar narrative in our talks, given our shared history and our shared interests, in the open web, open to everybody, regardless of disability, etc. Insert your Tim Berners-Lee quote of choice here. But also, of course, there are great reasons to care about semantics, but there's not actually that many reasons to care about semantics. And thus, I think we were both sort of came up with the same 5 or 6 reasons, which are accessibility, SEO, future-proofing, so that when a new device like the Apple Watch turns up, your site should already work well if you have used correct HTML semantics. But yeah, I mean, I think 10 years ago, telling everybody to care about semantics was largely ideological. It was hard to demonstrate a practical use.
That's how I literally started my talk. I showed slides of my talk, like I gave probably 10 years ago or something like this, and I said, yeah, we used to see HTML5 as a new hope in a Star Wars way, like new hope that something's gonna come and save us finally. And then I say it failed us because it restarted the web standardization process. It gave a new boost to it, but then nothing really happened with in developers' minds. Nothing really happened for the web platform in general. So we stopped caring about semantics short after it happened. Like new shiny new HTML5 tags, yeah, whatever. We still have no idea what's the difference between section and article. So it wasn't big of an impact from my perspective. So one of the main ideas of my talk was like, you can be cynical about semantics and use it only for practical reasons.
Yeah, well, you say people stopped caring about semantics. I'm not sure whether that's true. I think the people who never cared continued not to care, and the people who did care continued to care. And as new people came on board, it got a lot easier to persuade them to use semantics. So, for example, the fact that the header element built in the role of banner, so people didn't have to add the extra aria. It made it a lot easier to say to people, look, if you just use header, main, and nav and footer, you're already doing a lot of stuff better without you even having to try. I think the problem was that some of the elements are not properly or not adequately specified. You say, what's the difference between section and article? We've been asked that hundreds of times on HTML5 Doctor, and this conference season, I've been asked it a few times. The answer, by the way, podcast listeners, is just don't use section. Just don't bother using it. It has no real semantic value, whereas article does. And I think that's because they got dreamed up very early on in the genesis of Web Applications 1.0, which subsequently got renamed HTML5 and subsequently HTML Living Standard. And then they kind of fossilized because I think that the cool kids who wrote the spec were more interested in groovy JavaScript APIs and not actually that interested in semantic elements to mark up chunks of content. So ignore the section element. The main element is an excellent thing, and Steve Faulkner had to fight quite hard to get that added to the spec.
Oh yeah, I remember it was missing from WG version for a while.
For a long time, because Hixie said there was no use for it. And in fact, to be fair, I said there was no use to it, and luckily Steve Faulkner persuaded me that I was wrong and he was right, and so now I'm an ardent supporter of the main element. Because, it allows somebody using assistive technologies to hit a button and jump straight to that main content, meaning that you don't have need to have a skip links link. And to somebody who doesn't need it, then there's no, it doesn't make the experience any different or worse.
There's one thing that really helped me to understand the meaning of a main element. Once in a while, when internet connection is bad, browser fails to load style sheets for the page, and sometimes I see page without styles. So it takes a few minutes for browser to give up and just show HTML, and sometimes you have to scroll like 5, 6, 7 screens before you get to the actual content of a page, because like navigation, banners, some sidebars and nonsense like this, everything that surrounds the actual content of a page. But so when you see it, you start to realize, if you would go through this link by link, like paragraph by paragraph, list by list, you wouldn't get to the content, because you would forget what you were looking for. So if you have like at least jump to links, or better, both main and jump to content links, you would really help, because with styles it's all compact, it's all hidden somewhere in drop down menus and things like that. But when you see it without styles, you can actually experience it as assistive technology user would.
Yeah, yes. And a little while ago, I did a webinar with Leonie Watson, and I asked her to show the viewers how she, as a screen reader user, navigates and perceives the web. And I asked her to use my website, not because I'm holding it up as an exemplar of brilliance, but because I didn't want to name and shame anybody. Perfectly happy to name and shame myself. Maybe you can post the link. I edited out the 6 minutes or something of her on my site, showing how header, footer, nav, and main practically helped her to navigate. It's really interesting to see a real live human being actually using the web with a screen reader, and the difference between a page that's got semantic markup versus a page that doesn't. It really resonates, and I think you have to be a special kind of hard-hearted person not to care when you've seen a real human struggling.
Oh yeah.
It changes the way you think about it. It's not just 1% of users. It's the real people.
Exactly. It's easy to forget that there are real human beings operating the browsers who consume our content.
It's like hating IE11. You're not hating machine or software. You're hating actual people.
Exactly. And you say, no, it's not just 1% of users. 1% doesn't sound very much when you say 1%. But if you think 1% of 7 billion people, that's a lot of people.
Right. So we have this like a complete understanding of this accessibility part of things. I think like from my perspective, accessibility it's one of the main reasons. Maybe it's for some people it's the only reason left to care about semantics, and I get it. So it's important enough to be one of the main reasons to care about semantics. I think it's much easier to talk about semantics. I care about it in many ways, and I think it's a good thing for many applications. But I chose this way to explain semantics, and importance of semantics in HTML via accessibility practice. So that's one thing. But what are the other ways of pursuing semantics in HTML? Like what would be a good reason to do this apart from semantics?
Hmm. Well, it's funny because you said you chose to emphasize accessibility. I actually choose to de emphasize accessibility. I mean, I don't keep quiet about it because I have accessibility needs of my own personally, but I find that for one reason or another, if accessibility isn't enough of a draw for the person listening to me, I point out things like the Apple Watch, the fact that I have article elements and I have figures and fig caption means that the Apple Watch just apparently shows my site properly. Obviously, I'm not beautiful or rich enough to be allowed to wear an Apple Watch, so I haven't checked it out for myself. But
I did.
does it
All right.
work okay?
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, it's good that I have a friend who's beautiful and rich and is allowed to have an Apple Watch. But that's good. The idea that I wrote that markup in 2008 when I was researching how to use HTML5. It was still in spec, very much in specification, and I wanted to see whether the specification made sense to me and gave feedback to the working group saying, this doesn't adequately define it. I don't know what this is supposed to do, etc. But I wrote that markup 11 years ago. And last year, the new version of WatchOS came out and my site just worked. Who knows what's going to come out in 10 years' time? But I acknowledge that a lot of web developers have no expectation their sites are going to be online in 10 years' time, or they expect they will, but they don't care because they're contractors. SEO. Everybody cares about SEO. When I'm at a conference and I say, put your hand up if your boss tells you to make sure this website can't be found by Google or Bing or Yandex. Nobody puts their hand up. And the schema.org stuff really does help SEO. I think a couple of months ago, Google produced a blog post with actual numbers showing how much extra search traffic and conversions you get if you're using schema.org stuff, whether it be microdata or JSON LD.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned it because applying schema.org or JSON LD or similar things like that, like RDFA, and yeah, would be so much harder for developers than just using semantic HTML elements. Seriously, you have to go through the spec. I mean, serious spec, not as easy to read as HTML spec. You have to find the use case for your information you have on your site and try to fit it into categories of schema.org. And then you have to put a lot of extra attributes that are not easy to read. So it's much harder to implement than just the HTML tags.
Agreed, but it generally has a different purpose because you're marking up micro content. I find schema.org pretty easy to read, actually. I don't find the HTML spec particularly easy to read, and it's not really meant for me. It's meant for
Yeah, I guess I have more experience with HTML, so it looks easier for me.
yeah, but that will lead us into discussion of HTML5 Doctor soon. But but I do find schema pretty easy to read. But then, of course, my website's a blog, and there is a schema.org vocabulary for blog posting, and that's thus the only one I use. But what I always say to people, if you're mucking around with your source code in order to add schema.org microdata in whatever incarnation or syntax you particularly like, you might as well then add the HTML5 elements while you're doing it. I don't know how many people do, but I think they're pretty well used. I think main is quite prevalent on the web in the wild.
Yeah, like headings, main elements, and proper picture tags. I mean, IMG tags and alt attributes. They really serve additional hints for search engines to parse the content. But I think at some point, Google, Yandex, and other search engines, they kind of gave up on markup and they started to analyze the actual content of the page. So they're not judging the value of your page based on HTML tags only or HTML tags first. I think they take them into account like second or third even.
I don't think any of us know the magic, but it seems to me that they all use a mixture of heuristics, HTML analysis, schema org, if they can find it, page rank, etc.
When you have sites like twitter.com built on div soup, it's really hard to rely on HTML tags only. So you have to analyze the actual content. So these days, a lot of developers not just misuse HTML tags, they just don't use semantic ones. And in this situation, I think search engines have to fall back on actual content analysis.
Yes, and that div soup, it used to be table soup in the old days, but div
Oh yeah.
soup still continues, and I think a lot of that is to do with the current fashion for monolithic frameworks. I'm looking at you, React.
But Bruce, React is a library.
Ah, yeah, of course. AMP is a framework now, apparently, but
Yeah, yeah.
the trouble is that there's no reason at all why your nav component that you're getting off the shelf can't be wrapped in a nav element, and it's wrapped, but people don't do it, and the trouble is people are just taking these components off the shelf and using them without really thinking about what the structure of the elements is. Once these components are abstracted away, people spend even less time wondering about the semantics of them. I had a look recently at some popular libraries. Some of them are dreadful and some of them are really good. The Tenon UI library, for example, is a fabulous thing. It's
Mhm.
full of semantics, and I know that the people who wrote it actually tested it with people with assistive technologies and not just screen readers. And it's free and open source, whereas React Bootstrap is just div soup. So I know which one I'd choose. And at some point, when somebody gives me £1 million grant, I'm going to go through and score all the different libraries.
Speaking of frameworks and libraries, web components are not a library or a framework per se, but I think they're kind of a future of the web. It's something that's gonna happen with us sooner or later. Like we're gonna start using web components instead of just including some scripts and libraries and things like that. So I wonder what's the situation. Is there any conflict between custom elements, for example, web components and HTML semantics? Is there a way to combine them and use them together?
I think there is, but it's trickier than I would like it to be. It used to be the case that you could extend an existing component. So you could say button is equals my fancy button, and then it would inherit button semantics and the things the browser gives you free from button. But the Apple WebKit people were pretty vehement in their opposition to that. And although I was grumpy at the time, I do see their point. The actual number of real world components that will extend or inherit HTML are pretty low. But I'm quite excited by the AOM, the Accessibility Object Model, which will allow us to do a lot with web components without having to pollute the markup with 28 trillion ARIA attributes.
All right. So during initialization, they would apply all not just add attribute, but they would initialize the actual accessibility tree, not DOM tree, with some additional
Exactly.
goodness.
Exactly. I can send you a link to Leonie Watson again doing a talk in Singapore or Hong Kong about it. But it looks really exciting, and it's actively being developed by, I think, Apple, Google, and Microsoft or Firefox, but it's based on a Microsoft proposal. There's some big names involved with the specification. And I really like the way this is massively geeky, but I really like the way they specified it into different phases, acknowledging the real world challenges of specifying these kind of things. But yes, it means that you'll be able to set what is kind of like ARIA roles, etc., inside the component itself, rather than you having to sprout lots of ARIA on top of your component, and knowing how to do that and remembering to do that. The logic will actually be encapsulated in the component, so that therefore when you do grab it off the shelf, you really are grabbing something that works and you don't have to add extra stuff, because we all know that built-in beats bolt-on bigly.
Oh yeah, and also it's not a web components exclusive thing. It could be applied to any library or framework. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think there are some initial implementations. There is some initial implementation in browser
Yeah.
already. So yeah, maybe behind flags, but still, I hope to see something released probably even this year.
I would think so, and I think that's the next big thing for HTML. I mean, there's new APIs, etc., being added all the time, but this is foundational. It has the potential to make a lot of stuff better quickly. So I'm excited by this. The one thing that people are worried about is it would be possible for a malicious website to tell whether somebody's using an assistive technology, or it's potentially possible.
Well, there are already some tricks to do this by detecting some behavior patterns and things like that. So there's no really way to hide it. I think like reliable way to hide it.
I agree, but luckily the web is full of cleverer people than me, so I'm pretty sure that we can reach a compromise. As always with the development of the web platform, it's about making sensible compromises.
So we were discussing at the beginning the idea in developers' heads and the actual reality of HTML specs and browser implementations. There are two of them still, and but this process is this situation is slowly changing. As far as I understand, W3C spec editors and what WG editors they found some middle ground and they're willing to merge their specs, or what's going on there?
Yes, I was not sure of what tense I should use, one of the editors of the HTML 5.3 spec. We had a meeting in Amsterdam last June or July, and we were told that the W3C was effectively going to stop developing HTML and it would go to the what WG.
Meaning that they're not gonna support their own version, but they're gonna still do some work on what WG one, right?
Yes, I mean the people who were participating in the W3C spec are now participating in the what WG spec, and I think that the W3C will continue to maintain snapshot versions. Yeah, and this is good and bad. It's good that we're going to have a single source of truth for the spec, because it was always confusing that there was a W3C spec and a what WG spec, and the two would say different things.
Yeah, even conflict things, not just slightly different, but sometimes they're one of the main examples I remember is there's multiple H1 tags on a page. Yeah.
There were a number of differences. For example, the W3C spec only allowed one main element per page,
Oh yeah, that's true.
whereas the WhatWG version allowed multiple versions because you might be swapping them in and out with JavaScript.
And I think in W3C version, it's allowed to have multiple mains if they're hidden with hidden attribute or display none, which is basically the same thing.
Yeah, and there were things like the H group element wasn't in the W3C spec because it's completely useless. There are myriad differences, and that reflect the different purposes of the organization organization. I mean, the W3C spec showed what was actually implemented. The WhatWG spec has always been forward looking, and some parts of it are, complete descriptions of reality, and other parts of it are basically people jamming and riffing on ideas, and
Mm.
they're implemented nowhere. And the trouble is, if you're a developer and you just want to know what you can use, maybe the WhatWG spec isn't the best place.
That's true. Yeah, and also W3C version was full of interesting comments on accessibility and on implementation for developers. Some usage examples, not just for browser vendors, but for actual developers. And it was the main reason for me to prefer W3C version.
It's one of the reasons that I agreed to be the editor, or one of the editors for it, along with Shwetank Dixit, another old colleague of ours, because there would be real world examples for devs pointing out, accessibility stuff. Mostly driven by Steve Faulkner. Hat tip to Steve, the guy does so much for accessibility, etc. And it was, I know that he tried so many times to get that stuff added to the WhatWG specification, and his pull requests were overlooked, etc. So I'm cautiously hopeful that the WhatWG people will start accepting more dev-focused examples, etc. But I do think there's a fundamental difference in what the WhatWG spec was for and what the W3C spec was for, and I worry that they won't have. I worry that people will think that stuff that is super, super nascent is actually in browsers, and I worry that people won't get the advantages of Steve et al.'s accessibility advice. But they haven't made me king of the internet yet, so my worry is just a formless worry that I can do nothing about.
Is it something that's happening already, or it's just a plan for specs to, well, not to merge, but to move development into what WG?
It's happened already.
It's already happened. So basically, if you're a developer, and Bruce Lawson's advice to use what WG version now, or it's not quite there yet.
Personally, I would use, and I do use both, because they haven't diverged any more than they were already different. And there's valuable advice in the W3C version of the spec, which I hope will be merged into the WhatWG spec. But HTML 5.3 is never going to be a candidate recommendation. There was talk about publishing it as a W3C note, but that's just
How? So you're saying that HTML 5.2 would be the last recommendation?
I don't know whether the snapshotted versions of the W3C of the WhatWG spec will be recommendations in the future. I just don't
Well,
know
it's not.
enough about the process. I've always found W3C process to be somewhat opaque.
It's not that it's super important for developers to understand what is a recommendation, what's not, because like these days we mostly rely on browser implementations because that's what users use. Or that's the main reason for us to care. But W3C version my favorite for many years. So it's I got used to it so much. So it's much harder for me to read what WG version because like of the design of the navigation. But I think I'll have to deal with it.
Yeah, I think so.
So you mentioned already HTML5 Doctor project. It used to be a very valuable source of wisdom for me because we used to translate articles in a web standards community. Like we used to have articles like B and I element or figure and fig caption element translated to Russian from HTML5 Docker and many others. I think we have like 5 to 6 articles translated or maybe even more, but they are kind of I wouldn't say outdated, but they are forgotten. I would say because no one's really no one cares what's the difference between strong and B anymore. And just like I said in my semantics for cynics talk, there's no real use in distinguishing between B and strong elements in your source code, because actual browsers, actual screen readers, they don't care. They don't have a way to tell if it's B or strong. They probably a bit outdated. Where is it now? Or what's the place of HTML5 Doctor site website these days? Is it still valuable?
I don't know. I mean, it started off, like I mentioned earlier, in 2008, maybe 2009, I can't remember. But instead of doing real work for Opera, I was forcing my WordPress templates to use HTML5 and tweeting about it and blogging about it. And I think that was quite valuable because it allowed me to say to the authors, I'm a real developer and I'm trying to work out the difference between these tags, and there's not enough in the spec to help me decide. And they would go through and tweak the spec. And I think it was a future of web apps or future of web design. Can't remember which conference it was. And I just said, on Twitter, anybody want to meet up and have a chat about HTML5? Let's do so. And a group of us who'd been talking on Twitter but had never actually met in real life, went to the pub and we decided to make HTML5 Doctor to be a resource that wasn't in spec language about HTML5. We did it. It was pretty good. A lot of people came to visit it. And as happens, people got married and had kids. People got jobs. I moved jobs and didn't have the time to maintain it. And crucially, better alternative documentation turned up on the web, and it seemed like there was no real reason to continue writing the HTML5 Doctor stuff. Mm-hmm. So when it went down last week, I was on holiday, so I didn't pay much attention. I sort of said, well, is it time to take it offline? I think what we'll do, if Richard, who actually does the hosting, agrees, is we'll probably turn off all the comments, because there were trillions of spam comments because of WordPress blog, and just keep it alive, a bit like the Web Standards Project.org is still alive, even though we're doing nothing more, because it is part of the history of the web. It's not a major part, but it is, a little bit. Future archaeologists might care about it.
We still link to HTML5 Doctor articles from HTML Academy courses. So it would be good if it will be online and with the same link structure. The thing what I did with some projects from 10 or 15 years ago, most of them were based on WordPress. So what I did, I took a static copy of everything that I have, like by wget or like curl or whatever script I used to get all the content from the site. So instead of running the whole WordPress with database and PHP and everything, I just took a static snapshot of the site. I checked all the links, so everything was intact. I turned off comments because there was no use for it, because it's like no one's answering questions and everything. So it's much reliable to have website like this, and it's much more cheaper to host, because you don't have to enable database and PHP support. So it could cost you like nothing to host static websites. So that's my recommendation for you.
Oddly enough, I was looking at that. I was chatting to Phil Hawksworth, who is one of the Netlify DevRel people, about another project. But there are plugins now to WordPress where basically it will just vomit out, as you say, a flat HTML file.
Oh yeah,
with all the link structures intact, and then you can just port that over to Netlify. They'll host it for 3 beans and a cigarette. And there's no attack surface, because there's no database running, there's no code running. It's just a static version. They just point the DNS servers to the Netlify domain. So I'm going to suggest to the boys that we do that with HTML5 Doctor.
The problem with Netlify, though, that it wouldn't be available in Russia. Seriously, we have serious problems with Netlify. Like my whole Twitter timeline is full of people like screaming and crying over Netlify, like, oh, it's the best thing that ever happened to the web, and it's so easier to use it than any other hosting solutions. But it's just most of the sites hosted on Netlify are blocked in Russia because of their IPs are blocked for some reason by a Russian government.
Probably an accident.
Yeah, it's an accident. Well, it was an accident because they were trying to block Telegram Messenger, and it was hosting some parts of it on Netlify. So they blocked the whole range of IP addresses. I'm just telling you that hosting something on Netlify these days, it's like losing the audience from Russia at all, mostly.
I had no idea that Netlify was blocked in Russia.
So yeah, that might be tricky. So as a static copy, HTML5 Doctor is a good idea, but hosting on Netlify, I don't know. I don't know.
Wow, I suppose I'd better move my Pussy Riot appreciation site off Netlify then.
Yeah, it would be good to have it available in Russia as well. All right. So I hope you'll find the easier way to host it, just for history's sake.
But yeah, I don't like taking things off the web because who knows what will be of interest to future archaeologists. So we'll get that sorted out with my
All right.
copious free time.
Okay, back to what you're doing these days. Like you used to work for Smashing Magazine, but you left. And what's happening in your life? What's your current projects? I think I heard something about Prince XML and some others.
I'm back as a consultant, so I'm doing some work for Howcom William Lee on Prince XML, part-time, not full-time. For those who don't know, Prince XML is a piece of software, very old, very mature, 17 years old, that will allow you to make a PDF from HTML, CSS, and SVG. We've been engaged in an exercise in preparation for Prince 13 to come out, to allow developers to have more control over the mapping between HTML semantics and PDF semantics. Because maybe not many people know it, but PDF has its own semantics that allow people with assistive technologies to navigate around PDFs.
Oh, really? But because most of the PDFs on the web, well, not most of them, but many of them are just basically JPEGs in PDF container. So I guess they're not marked up properly. But if you convert something like even Keynote or HTML page into PDF, it's much lighter than images of the same content would be, and it's accessible at the same time.
It's accessible if you have reasonably accessible source, like anything else. If the source is well marked up, it can then be translated into PDF accessibility. There are multiple good reasons why inaccessible PDFs live. You know, if you're just preparing something to be printed, it doesn't need to be accessible, but a lot of governments, a lot of big organizations, for various reasons, offer their content as PDF. Therefore, it should be accessible. Therefore, it should be tagged. And Prince, in my opinion, has the best tagged PDF output. On the Mac, the Prince runs on the command line. You just do Prince, mylovelypage.html, --, and then you give the PDF profile that you want. You probably want the UA one, the Universal Accessibility one, and that will produce you an accessible tagged PDF that meets WCAG, which is good because WCAG also applies to PDFs that are delivered over the web. It'll do things like take your HTML lang equals RU and apply the RU language to the PDF, not translate it, but mark it as thus, so that the end user knows what language the PDF's in. It adds all the structural PDF tags, and it's really cool.
Oh, yeah, I used to use Prince for printing shower presentations back in 5 years ago, or maybe even more. Actually, Håkan, inventor of CSS and CEO of Opera. Maybe he's still.
No,
What's happened there?
he's not with Opera anymore.
So he actually influenced me in a way that I started this shower project, because they used to be this opera show or opera presentation. What was the format?
Opera show, yeah.
Opera show, yeah. So I thought, yeah, I'll just make my own presentation using Opera show, and I did. And then I thought, now I think I need this and that, and then I developed Shower. And then since 2009, or even, yeah, maybe since 2010, I'm still developing this presentation engine. There used to be a need for PDF expert of my presentation. Like back in 2010, I think it was a common thing to do for conference organizers to request PDF
Hmm.
from speakers. I think they still do these things, but as a conference organizer, I accept HTML presentations as well as a source. I'm not asking to export everything into PDF. I tried different solutions back then, and then I realized that Prince is the best spec compatible and the most convenient tool to export HTML and CSS into PDF. But then I struggled with some problems with compatibility, because what do you expect when you create a presentation or basically anything for browser? You expect this PDF engine to have the same level of support, the same number of features and even bugs in their source code, or like similar, and you expect the same results. But Prince used to be behind some technologies, because I remember like there was no Flexbox implementation back then, and not sure about the grids implementation these days in Prince XML, and some others, like I remember not being able to create lines using gradients, because there was no way to have transparent color in background in Prince for a while. So little details. And these days there's a script command line utility called Shower. So you can type Shower PDF, and then it will print your presentation into PDF using Puppeteer, basically Chromium with some extra APIs around it. So that's what I use myself, and that's what I recommend for developers to use. And the funny thing with printing, because it's not number one priority for browsers, for everyone really. I think Chromium and Prince, well, I wouldn't call Prince a browser, but Chromium and Prince, there are two engines for HTML and CSS that support at page for specifying page size. There's no way to specify page size in Safari, Firefox, Edge, anywhere. Only in Chrome and Prince. So there's no way for you to properly print something unless you use Chromium or Prince. That's so funny.
It is strange, isn't it? And I mean, I know myself. I can't remember the last time I tweaked my print style sheet on my website, because I don't tend to print stuff out.
I don't have printer at home, so
Whoa, you so 21st century. I do have a printer, but it doesn't get used a great. It gets used as a scanner more than anything. But there are still legions of use cases for printing out from the web. Going back to what you said about prints, Flexbox is there now. CSS Grid is coming in a version. I'm not sure if it's in version 13, depending. I haven't looked at the roadmap for a couple of weeks. I used to work for the quasi-governmental organisation that regulates lawyers in the UK, and for various reasons, every page of the website had a print this as PDF to save it. A lot of more traditional organisations use dated PDFs. I mean, dated as in time and date stamped, rather than dated as in archaic, as reference. This is what the rules were on this day. And that thing becomes a legal term of art, which is an important use case. Websites producing invoices, boarding passes, receipts, restaurant menus. And printing books is a significant use case for prints.
Yeah, I have Leah Veru's book CSS Secrets. The source of it is in HTML and CSS. Maybe I also have your and Remy's book HTML5. Maybe it was also originated in HTML CSS.
We wanted it to, but the publisher went, absolutely not. Microsoft Word.
Yeah, classics.
Yeah, yeah. So I had to relearn how to use Microsoft Word for that one. Yeah, I mean, Halcom's first book about CSS was written in HTML and CSS, and one of the use cases of prints, which I need to write an article about after I write the one about prints on Amazon Web Services. Um, is the extra, I think it was GCPM, generated content for paged media
Oh,
specs that Halcom wrote for CSS. They're not in browsers per se, but they are. A lot of that stuff's in print, so it allows you to add the extra things that books have. Like if, for example, you were printing a dictionary, probably in the top outside margin top of each page, you would have the first and the last word that's defined on this page so people can leaf through it and find it quickly.
oh, really?
That sort of thing is specifiable in prints using, well, a CSS extension, basically,
Uh huh.
a vendor prefixed.
CSS used to be heavily influenced by printing, what they have in printing. And these days it's not anymore, and it probably makes sense.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people who do need to print from the web. And if you're going to make a PDF, make it accessible, kids.
Yeah, that's true. While we're talking, I was going through Prince's roadmap, and I see there's many things going on, and I was wondering if it's like written from scratch, or if you're writing it as an independent engine, taking some source code from some other open source browsers. I have no idea how this works, so maybe you'd copy some code from Chromium project. I don't know.
I asked them because I was thinking about adding it to Can I Use. It is its own implementation. It's not WebKit, it's not Chromium, it's not Gecko. It is an independent implementation of the specs.
And this is amazing because there are no many independent implementations out there. It's good to have one more. And it's sad that it's not listed anywhere. It's not widely known that there is an implementation of modern specs, but not for browsing, but for printing.
Yep, I contacted the Alex Deveria, I think, who runs Can I Use, and asked if we could list it there. But he said entirely legitimately, if we start adding things that are not traditional browsers, there are a heck of a lot of different things which would have equal claims to be listed there and make the site just unwieldy. And I acknowledge that browsers is the main use case. But I'm probably going to add a Can I Use like easy glance at what specs are supported and what specs aren't. It's all documented, but who reads these days?
I heard that in science, those serious and smart people, they still use PDF a lot for scientific magazines and for sharing their papers and things like that. So one of the main reasons they still do this because not every way of expressing scientific meanings is supported on the web. For example, MathML. There's no way to use MathML freely on the web these days, and I heard that who's working on this? It was Igalia, and I think they're implementing it in Chromium.
Yes, a friend of mine, Brian Cardell, he's an Igalia DevRel, and he's working on MathML. I never ever see mathematics papers because I can barely count.
It's the same here.
But there's a huge community of people who need to be able to express their equations, etc., over the web. And yes, they're using PDF because you simply can't put those on the web. It's weird because there used to be a really good implementation of MathML in Chromium, but then they took freaked out.
One of the co-hosts of this podcast, Maria, she's a mathematician herself, and she gave a talk last year in Kiev, something about math on the web, and she said that math is the language of the universe, and this is one of the big reasons for Chromium and other browsers to support it.
That's very poetic. Math is the language of the universe. She's obviously a confirmed Pythagorean.
Oh yeah. So I wonder if you're going to support MathML and expand the usage of Prince for scientific community, for example.
Well, I can't answer that, but I will, when I'm having a meeting with them, I will recommend they support MathML, because that's one of the things I'm doing is recommending stuff for them to do. But I can't make that promise because I have no power to make it happen, but I will be recommending it.
Apart from Prince XML, what's going on in your life?
Well, oddly enough, only this morning, chum of mine in South Africa, Adrian Hope Bailey, has submitted to the Web Incubator Community Group an explainer that he and I have been working on for a new browser API called Web Monetization. And I'm really, really hopeful that this takes off, because what we want to do is kickstart basically a new revenue model.
I have an idea what Web Payment API is. Like it's the way to request. Basically, it's a payment request API. So you request payment. It's in the name. But what's web monetization?
Well, web payments are for discrete payments, like $10 for a CD or 100 rubles for this Pussy Riot album or whatever. Web monetization is streaming tiny amounts of money. The unit is nanodollars, but streaming it constantly to a website.
I have no idea how one could stream money. No, really, it sounds complicated.
There is a payment provider. I'm consulting for Coil.com, who are a payment provider. Their business model, every payment provider can make their own business model. Coil's business model is you pay $5 a month to them, and they will stream money to any monetized website that you visit on your behalf. And if they pay more than $5, that's fine. They don't take any more from you. It's a $5 all you can eat model. And if you are a webmaster and you want to monetize your website, you will go to your bank or your digital wallet or whatever and ask for a payment pointer, which it's got a dollar in front of it, so it's obvious it's about money. It resolves to an HTTPS URL, which is your wallet. But it's safe to share and it is human readable. So you can, read it over the phone to somebody. That was part of the design. You add a meta tag, meta name equals monetization, content equals your payment pointer. And then anybody who comes to your site with, at the moment, it's a Firefox or Chromium extension, the Coil.com extension, but we're proposing that it be an open standard so that it can be a whole ecosystem of different payment providers, and you will get money coming into your wallet. Simple as that.
So you're basically this Coil company replaces what, like a payment provider, like a PayPal?
No, it's precisely not to replace anything. It's to make a new ecosystem for people to get paid, because the trouble is with the web is, number one, we trained people to believe content should be free. And then we polluted the web with advertising.
To support content creation.
Exactly. And you'll remember, Vadim, that we worked for Opera, which was the first browser to have a built-in ad blocker. And I used to get emails from people hating on us saying, I earned $1,000 a month from ads on my website, and I live in Croatia or Belarus, and that basically paid for my life. And now you've cut off my revenue stream. And I always felt guilty because I used to have ads on my site before I joined Opera. So this is an attempt to allow people to monetize creating content without having to have massive, heavy, intrusive surveillance capitalist ads all over their site.
I'm a communist in a way. I mean, I don't have any ads on projects I run. I believe in this thing. I don't advertise anything. But for a web standards project, we have sort of, how would you call it, like native ads. Basically, we invite some guests to join our podcast and tell something interesting. And that's the way for them to tell their story and something interesting. It's the way for listeners to hear some interesting stories. Also, we have Patreon page, and we have some income that we spend on equipment and some stickers and some prizes for our patrons. So we're trying to monetize our project that's free for everyone with some tools like that. And I wonder if projects like web standards community and like that, it's a target audience for this spec and company.
Absolutely is, because this would supplement your Patreon and your sponsored content, if you like. And I don't see that kind of stuff as advertising. I mean, you're lucky that you have a community big enough where people would want to give you money to come and talk about relevant projects to a relevant audience who won't be turned off and bored. I'm thinking about not just web developers, but I'm thinking about the huge long tail of the web that, probably you and I never see. The women who write parenting blog posts, or people who write about medical issues. I'm thinking about the forum that I used when I first got diagnosed with MS. These are things that don't attract corporate sponsors, so people are reduced to horrible ad farm. I mean, when I had ads on brucelawson.co.uk before I joined Opera, it was because in 2003, 2004, when I started my website, web hosting was much more expensive than it is now, even though it's 16 years later. And I had 2 young children, a low salary, and hosting was a non-trivial amount of money, and the ads paid for that. It wasn't like I was, sitting in jacuzzis full of champagne with supermodels on the money. It just meant that I was giving up my time to maintain a web standards blog, but I wasn't actually out of pocket as well. And you've got the same thing, I think, with your projects. And it's nice to be able to do that without ads. Native ads are fine, but the horrible malignant things that track you all over the internet and potentially give you malware. I'm glad we blocked those at Opera, and I wish they would go away. So web monetization is an attempt to provide a different revenue model, and that's why we're prosing it as an open standard, because we really want companies to compete against Coil, offering different business models, because we want this to be a way of content creators to monetize their sites without ads, etc.
But so far, how was the feedback on your proposal? I wonder if there are any other companies or spec editors or web standards community members interested.
Feedback, I don't know, because it went live 30 minutes before we started this conversation, and and I haven't. Obviously, I'm not rude enough that I'd be looking at something else while.
Is it published as a recommendation yet? Just kidding.
It's a proposal. It's in enough shape that it's open for discussion, because we obviously will change it with community feedback. I know a couple of the browser vendors are interested. I know there's a lot of content creators that we've spoken to who are interested, and I shall be persuading friends of mine to put this meta tag in their head, so they can get monetized up.
We'll be glad to be one of the first users of this meta tag and mechanism.
Groovy, and any feedback you have on it, we've designed it to be as easy as possible. It's a one line that you add to your head. It's a bit trickier to monetize things on YouTube and SoundCloud, etc., because of course not everybody makes written content in HTML. We're figuring that out. But yes, so that's my humble wish at the moment, to make a brand new revenue model for content creators, because those are the people who've been writing all the fabulous stuff that we've been consuming and learning from for free for the last 15 years.
Oh, wow. Bruce Lawson saying a revenue model.
Yeah, we're going to leverage it, synergize the ARPU or something.
Oh, yeah.
Now I have to go and wash my mouth out with bleach.
What else is going on in your life and your work?
Doing a little bit of consultancy with my good friends in Wix, a couple of hours sanity checking every week with them, and working on a secret hush hush project with the flame-haired Foss love god Stuart Langridge, called Sword Cello.
Sword cello, really?
Yeah, and he would kill me tomorrow when we go out for our weekly meeting stroke beer if I gave any details about it.
Okay, so we'll see. But the name is cool.
The name is cool, and if you go to swordcello.com, you'll hear that I've already made some introductory music based upon the classic zombo.com, because I needed to buy the domain name, and it just saddens me to have a domain name with nothing on it. If you're going to have some content, you need a song, don't you?
Oh yeah. That's true. That's typical Bruce Lawson.
That's typical. Yeah. I might grow older, but I don't grow up.
You were listening to 187th special episode of Web Standard Podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Bruce.
Rock and roll and web standards.
Thank you for listening. See you next week in the regular Russian speaking podcast. Cheers.
Bye.